Let's Talk Tunnelling is produced by XRJV and proudly sponsored by DC Adams Group, Why Safety Matters.
Welcome to Let's Talk Tunnelling. Now, this is a first for Let's Talk Tunnelling. We're going to go Skype all the way to Townsville. I've got another experienced tunneler in on board, actually an ex-tunneler. He's a retired man. He's settled in Townsville, but I'll let him introduce himself. This is Fred Hill. How are you going, Fred?
Yeah, great, Dallas. Good to see you, mate. Been a while. Been retired for a bit.
I usually get guys in, mate. I usually get guys in and we sit down, have a bit of a feed and a beer and have a good chin wag. But, you know, you're going to be, like always, mate, starting new things for me, and that's going via or remote, and that's through Skype. And look at you, mate, eh? You set it all up for me and it was just piece of piss.
Well, we'll see how we go, mate. I'm the most untechnical guy in tunnelling, they reckon. Many a manager and a superintendent have made allowances for my lack of tech skills over the years.
Good on you. Now, well, welcome to Let's Talk Tunnelling. I'll probably just start off with, you are retired, and I didn't know that. We had a bit of a conversation earlier today. You finished up, but you're still in the game and you're still interested in what's going on, and you still know quite a few people in the game as well. But you're close to 30 years in the industry too, so you've done a good bloody stint in there, haven't you?
Yeah, it's been a good run. I've enjoyed it, had an absolute ball. I've met some fantastic guys, absolute legends. First came into the tunnelling, bloke took a chance on me, an old English tunnelling legend, or he's a manager, an engineer, took a chance and put me on, and just blossomed, went from strength to strength.
Yeah, good.
I suppose
so
I should
what
tell you how I
talk
got
to
into
me,
it.
Fred? Like when I say you're close to 30 years, so what was that job, and where was that chance given to you?
Right, well, at the time I was crayfishing down in Bass Strait, and didn't have much money, leased my licence, because cray licences are worth a fortune, owned the pots and owned the boat, but that was it. And anyway, I capsized in the middle of winter down off Cape Lip Trap. My own fault. I had a pot hooked up under a ledge and was pulling at it from all different angles, trying to pull it free, and didn't pay enough attention to the big seas coming through, and one curled over on top of me, and next thing I knew, we're head over heels in the water, and ended up, I was in Bass Strait for about 6 hours before the air ambulance come and plucked me out of the water and took me to Traralgon Base Hospital.
Holy
so
shit.
End of story. I was broke after that because I wasn't insured or anything, and so potted along trying to fix the boat up a bit. But I heard about possible job going up in this tunnelling caper up in Melbourne, and they were building a sewer tunnel. It happened to be the Northwestern Sewer Project, and a bloke down where I was living down near Bass Strait at Walkerville, he had a semi-trailer and he used to cart in the precast segments, and he said, go and have a chat to them. They'll want some people shortly. So I kept ringing up and I didn't feel I was getting anywhere. So one day I just jumped in the car and drove the 200 or 300 kilometres up to the job site and went in and introduced myself. And people were sort of looking at me, have you got an appointment? And no, I just wanted to come and meet the manager and meet the superintendent and let them see who they've been talking to on the phone. It was quite funny because I'd had a beard I'd grown for about, 6, 7, 8 years. It was a big full beard and long woolly hair, but I shaved it all off.
You're a real Popeye the Sailor Man then.
Oh, yeah, I was. So I shaved it all off, thought I looked all spruced up for this interview. I went up there and they got me to sit in the crib room, wait till one of them was free. First guy that walks in was a bloke, I can't say their names, I know, because I'm on YouTube, but got to know him very well over the years. This little guy walks in with a long red beard down to his waist, long red hair down to his waist at the back, and bald as a badger on the top. And I thought, shit, why did I bother shaving all mine off? Anyway, I got to meet this English engineer. I can just say his first name, Ernie, and an absolute gentleman. And him and the foreman, or the superintendent actually, had a chat to me, and they said, why on earth did you take the risk of driving all this way up? I said, well, why not? I said, I can't do anything else at the moment, and I wanted to meet you guys and have you meet me and see who you're talking to.
Put a name to the face sort of thing, eh?
Yeah. So by the time I got back to Walkerville, the phone had rung and, the job start Monday. So this was on the Friday. So I grabbed a caravan off a mate of mine down at Walkerville and took that up to Sunshine, and that was it. Started from there in a caravan. Yeah.
So what sort of job did you like? I know nowadays you get this bloody TW 1, 2, 3, 4, right up to about 6, I think it is now, in these EBAs and these contracts and all that. So you're a fisherman, die-hard fisherman, flipped your boat, bloody couldn't afford to fix it up how you wanted it. So then you heard about this job, you rocked up to this place, and Friday had an interview, bought a caravan, then started on the Monday. What were you doing for your first job?
All right. Well, it was, as I say, it was called the Northwest Sewer Project. It was Maribyrnong in North Melbourne. And, it was a TBM job. And so I was put in charge of the mixing the grout. In those days, nowadays, every tunnel has the endless grout line running down the tunnel with all the automatic grout machines. But in those days, they had a batch plant on the surface and you'd mix the grout, run it onto a conveyor, drop it down the plat into a concrete adgie, which was then taken up the tunnel by a loco. And so part of my role was doing the grout and then jumping down on the plat, shunting the rakes around and all that. So that was my first job in tunnelling, and things have certainly changed a lot. Because,
what do you think of that, though? When you rocked up there and they said, start on Monday, did you know what you were going to do, though? When you had that interview and you went and bought that caravan, or got that caravan?
Yeah, they told me, look, we'll start you on the surface because we need someone to run the grout plant. So I'd previously had many years before, had a bit of experience in concrete plants and whatnot before I went fishing, and when I was about 18 or 19. And I didn't mind it. I didn't mind what they had me doing, whether it was on a shovel cleaning out bloody sumps, which is part and parcel of tunnelling. And, so I started off on that. And funny thing, though, things have changed enormously. I hadn't been in it for long, been there for a couple of days, and foreman says to me, take this rake up to the back of the TBM, rake being all the cars joined together with the segment cars, the muck cars, the grout car, and all the services on this line of wagons, and you push it up with a diesel loco. And I looked at him and I said, I've never driven one. How do I do it? He said, well, you can't get bloody lost. He said, you just go backwards and forwards. He says, there's one way in and one the same way out. So he says, just go forward till you get to the TBM, unhook the loco and bring the loco back here. I said, holy.
So that was your VOC, mate, just taking that
was
rake.
My VOC. He showed me where the dead man was to keep your foot on that, otherwise you can't go anywhere. And that was it.
Wow.
Wow. I was terrified. I tell you, I was terrified.
Yeah. But you got there and back. That's the main thing.
Oh, yeah. Yep. Got there. Didn't run over the back of the TBM or anything. So didn't run over anyone in the tunnel. So I was laughing. That was my induction to the tunnelling. And
so how long did that job run for you? Like how long were you on that job for?
Yeah, that was a very interesting job because I wasn't there all that long before we had to stop tunnelling and build a compressed airlock in the tunnel, an airlock about 120 metres long, which could take the whole of a rake, all the cars, etc. Because they knew it was coming. They encountered very, very soft running ground, running sand, which they were scared you could lose the face. It could all come in through the head of the machine. So they compressed the whole tunnel, and that was really interesting. I've never struck that before on any other jobs.
So you know how we talk about EPB machines now, which compress the head when they're cutting to keep that pressure on. This wasn't, obviously, and then...
This was an EPB. It was an EPB, but they were worried that, okay, you could compress it while you're cutting, but then as you're feeding it out, you could still lose the ground, lose the face with the running sands rush in and fill up the front part of the tunnel, bury the TBM. So they'd
when
already
you say
planned.
a sewer tunnel, this is going out into the ocean, is that right? So you've got sand.
No, it was just under the northern suburbs of Melbourne. It was for local suburban sewers to link into this main sewer tunnel. So it was really interesting, build this airlock, because then, of course, they had to have airlock attendants to compress the people and compress the machinery to let it into the compressed tunnel. And so I put my hand up to train for that, because not many people wanted the extra responsibility and the extra hours, because going on to work in compressed air, the crews would only be 8-hour shifts, and I wanted every dollar I could get. I was pretty hungry, so I knew we'd be on 12-hour shifts as the airlock attendant. So that was really interesting, really, really good. Just getting to, you'd have the tunnel compressed and the inside door of the airlock closed. You'd open the out-by door where the rake or the people, say the crew was coming in to get compressed, they would come in, you'd close it up, and then you'd monitor them on television screens as you compressed them. You just slowly compress them in regulated stages until they were at the same pressure as the tunnel inside, and then they'd give you the thumbs up, everyone was fine. You'd open the inside door and they'd walk off and head to do their tunnelling work. I'd close that door up, then decompress the chamber so that the rake could then come in. It'd be pushed in by a diesel loco into the airlock, the compressed airlock, head back off. I'd shut the doors on the rake, compress the rake, and then open the inside door once it was at the same pressure as the inside tunnel, and a battery electric loco would then hook onto the rake and take it up to the back of the TBM. So it was extremely interesting. I'd never envisaged anything like that in my life, and it's the only tunnel I've worked on where they've compressed the whole tunnel. There's been many other tunnels where they've compressed the head of the TBM, or even had a little airlock for the people to decompress in when they've come out of the head, but that was the whole tunnel being compressed. And it was interesting because it makes the tunnel completely dry. It's actually dusty in there because all the water is pushed back into the ground and held back into the ground. So, great job.
What a start, mate. That's unreal.
Very first tunnel. And so, of course, to run all that compressed air, they had to have a massive bank of these huge compressors up on the surface and all oil-free air so that the guys weren't breathing oil fumes in, and was a big job.
So I don't know Melbourne that well, though, but you're in a city, aren't you? So you're having all that gear to, like compressors and everything, on the surface, humming away there.
Yep.
But then most of the stuff's underground, but you still have to have stuff on the surface. And that's, where'd you say, North Melbourne?
Maribyrnong, in the north of Melbourne, right up the top there next to the Maribyrnong River it was, actually. And, yeah. And so, yeah, big project. Had to quickly whack up a big plywood wall around all these compressors so that the noise wouldn't travel to the nearby neighbours, etc., because, of course, it had to run 24/7. And so it was excellent.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
So after that, did you carried on? Obviously, there was job after job, or how'd you go?
It was pretty much job after job for quite a while. I was on that one. That was going well. They'd got through that bad ground and had to they could decommission the airlock, and before long the TBM had a main bearing go down on it, and so they managed to limp forward to a road, to underneath a road with a median strip in it, sunk a shaft down in the median strip, pulled the main bearing out, and sent that away to be refurbed, which was about 6 or 8 weeks. But in that time, I was given the opportunity to go over to a tunnel in Port Hedland to do a tunnel under the harbour for the iron ore producers there. So I jumped at that because there was only 8 of us went from Melbourne to kick that tunnel off, and the only way I got a gig was because of my batch plant experience on the grouting. So the same engineer, Ernie, he initially said no, I couldn't go because I didn't have enough tunnelling experience, but then next thing he calls me up from underground. Oh shit, what have I done? Go into the office and said, if you still want to go to Port Hedland, there's a spot on there for you. Over there, there's a Japanese firm going to build a automatic grout plant where it'll just put retarder in the grout, pump it down to the TBM, and it'll just be an automatic plant. It can operate itself. It just needs someone to learn how to operate it and then train a grout plant operator on each of the shifts that are working there.
So Fred, what does the retarder do? You know, you said it mixes retarder with it. What's a retarder?
The retarder stops the grout, which is a cement-based product, stops it going off. It can last for a few days. It'll just...
Oh, it's a chemical?
Yes, it's a chemical, and It gets added in small doses to the grout up on the surface where it's being mixed. That then gets pumped down a separate line down to the TBM, and whenever they need it to fill grout in behind their ring of segments, they just switch on the pump there, and away it goes. It just takes it as it needs it. But at the head where they're pumping the grout into the back of the concrete segment, then it gets injected with accelerator, which sends it off to counteract the retarder. And nowadays it's a very common thing. They do it on basically all TBM jobs. They have a grout plant on the surface, pumping the grout down to the TBM and then injecting accelerator into it just as it goes in behind the concrete segment. For example, the one in Port Hedland.
Fred, you know when you talk about TBM, so that's a tunnel boring machine, cutting out the whole tunnel at once and inserting segments as we go. But the thing about these machines that do these these tunnels, there's so much more behind these machines, isn't there? Like yourself and these grout plants, bringing in these segments, like you say, this rake, these locos and everything like that. So your job in those early days was to send grout down and also another chemical called
retarder
to mix together, and then you send that down to the machine where they're installing segments for the lining of the tunnel, pumping this grout up, and then they do an accelerant in there too to make it go hard. So you sort of counter
That's correct. Yeah.
The retardant that's coming in. So that retardant slows it down.
The retarder is actually added on the surface so that grout that's mixed in the plant up on the surface can last for a couple of days. It's just churning away.
Why do you want it to last a couple of days for, Fred? Why would they put it up like that for?
It doesn't need to last for a couple of days, but in case it has to, because as the tunnel goes further down, the grout is in this line. If they have a bit of a breakdown at the TBM, it could be in that grout line for a day or two before they start using more grout, so.
That's right. So there's, could be kilometres by then, this tunnel could be kilometres. So you could have kilometres full of concrete in this pipe. If you haven't got a chemical in there to keep it soft or runny, then it could go off and you could have a whole kilometres full of hard concrete that's set in your line.
I've seen that happen.
Keeps it from that.
Yep.
Yeah, right.
And for example, that tunnel under the harbour at Port Hedland, because it was very fractured ground that they were in going under the harbour because of earlier blasting to create a big shipping channel for the big iron ore carriers that come in there. So the ground was all fractured. So they were basically full ocean pressure of water outside the tunnel. So if they didn't have that grout go off very quickly, the water would just wash it away. And so they got it to the stage where it would go off in 5 seconds once they added that accelerator to it. So was just enough time to get out into the voids behind the segments, and bang, it went off to stop it washing away.
Jesus, mate, you'd almost have to be a scientist to run one of those bloody grouting labs, wouldn't you?
The engineers set it up very, very well. These 2 Japanese engineers came over to set up the plant. They couldn't speak a word of English and I couldn't speak a word of Japanese. So we did very well with sign language, working out how it worked and everything. But we were lucky. Kumagai, who was, said the word, but
all good.
The Japanese partner of our company there, they had an engineer there, really nice guy, and he had fairly good English. And so he interpreted a lot between me and the 2 technicians from Japan who were building this plant, and it was quite funny. The very first time we turned it on, the Japanese engineer Henry goes, "I'll go down to the TBM. I'll make sure it starts up all right." I said, "Yep, all good, Henry, all good. You go. I'm right. No dramas." It starts mixing, drops a batch into the mixer, and it's all air operated, and all these valves are going, and another batch drops, and I think, yeah, that's pretty full. That's about enough. We don't want any more in there. The next thing, all the valves start operating again for another batch, and I'm going, oh shit! I'm leaning over the decline, screaming out, "Henry!"
Yeah.
Poor old Henry comes running back up this decline. There's grout going everywhere. Someone had bumped the bloody sensor that told it to shut off once it was at a certain level. Very simple, easy to fix, but I had no idea what was going on. So these were teething problems that we overcame. But no, it ended up as a great batch plant. Only problems we ever had with it were human, man-made problems. It went perfectly, just left to its own devices.
Well, Fred, this is an amazing start, mate. 2 tunnels and some interesting stories already. So carrying on from that job, so that was a good job, though. You enjoyed that job, both jobs, I suppose?
Well, I've enjoyed most of the tunnels I've worked on, 99%. That one was great. I don't want to hold you up too much, but we had an actual cyclone came over the top of us, just right smack bang over the top of Port Hedland, Cyclone Rachel, and that was fun.
Yeah.
We'd already we'd just got back to work after the Christmas shutdown, so we're pretty lucky, and we had everything chained down, dogged down with wire ropes, and you name it, everything was lashed down so it couldn't move. And so we came back, and a day later, Cyclone Rachel came in over the top of us, and all our best plans laid. Nothing. We ran a fuel line to a generator from a 1,000-litre tank so that we could have power non-stop through the cyclone to run the pumps, etc. But for some reason, the generator didn't switch on. That's an Lecky's problem, that one, but it didn't switch on. So yeah, bloody Sparkies. But me and another foreman, Monty, we were the first back on site after the cyclone. We came in and took one look down the tunnel, and holy shit, it was just full of water, grease, oil, every conceivable bit of debris, because bear in mind the TBM was pulled apart with, they'd had TBM problems there too. The head had gone on it, so we'd taken the main bearing out, and so there was just full of oil and grease through this flooded tunnel, and it was fun and games dewatering that.
Hey, Fred, I'm going to ask you this because I've had another gentleman on last week. He'd been in the game, 40 years, and compared to nowadays and the days that you're around doing those sort of work, what was it like? What was the cruise like? What was the I know there's a lot of banter in tunnelling, and everyone's we're like a big family, and we all have our little squabbles and bits and pieces and all that. But what was it like back then, working on crew, working on shift, being in Port Hedland? What was the feeling amongst the people and the people in tunnelling back then, especially on shift and that? What was it like back then?
It was pretty good. I think especially the one in Melbourne was excellent because people had been used to just that sort of environment. But in Port Hedland, that sorted a few people out because I think a lot of people expected it to be like a tropical resort, but in effect it's not. It's a hot, dusty iron ore town and full of sandflies and mosquitoes and flies and that. And but I enjoyed it thoroughly because it was terrific pay. We were well looked after, did long hours, but when we weren't working, there was a lot of good camaraderie with people going fishing and crabbing, and you set some crab pots down off because we were right at the water's edge, of course, so you'd throw a couple of crab pots in there and get a feed of crabs on night shift, and someone would go up before smoko and start a fire and boil them up, and we'd have a feed of crabs and that for night shift and things like that. So yeah, it's
well, that brings me to a question then, Fred. You know, like I get a lot of guys asking me about tunnelling, and I know we do, you know, big hours and long shifts and even long stints now with the 7374. You know, and it's interesting the movements that you've done, you know, Melbourne and then out to Port Hedland, and you're a fisherman, you know, as well, and you know, survived on the sea. You're living in Port Hedland, like you say, it's a dusty old place, but you still had that work-life balance, eh? You could still get that in. And
like,
how important is that?
It is very important for people to still keep a bit of a work-life balance. I know most of the people I've worked with want the long hours because they're in it to make the money, and that's completely understandable. I was the same when I was on wages, but you still need to have that bit of work-life balance because otherwise you burn out and you find yourself getting too cranky and whatnot, and little things start upsetting you. And you know, but that's to me it was part and parcel of the thing. I didn't find it hard work, to be honest. I found it quite good after some of the jobs I'd had, because prior to fishing I was cutting sleepers, railway sleepers in the bush, and that was bloody hard work. That was very hard work. And so to me, the tunnelling was dirty, and that didn't worry me in the least, but it was enjoyable. I had a great time. I loved it. Yeah.
Well, there's another question I'm going to ask you then, mate. You know, in your experience, and you sort of touched on what we do a little bit, you know, it's a dirty job and all that, and we big hours. So what makes a good tunneler? And what do you look for? You know, you've been a manager and you've been a supervisor and you've been on these major projects. What makes a good tunneler, do you think, in your experience?
Yeah, I guess I'm probably a bit of a dinosaur. I know a lot of people these days try and be a bit touchy-feely, you know, really mollycoddle people a bit, but I was brought up a little bit different, and I guess I've been that way, you know, with people on my cruise. I expect them to put in hard when it's needed. We can relax, have a good time, have a nice time when things are under control and when targets are being met. But when we're under the pressure of meeting a target, then I expect everyone to jump in, get dirty, do the hard yards, and don't complain. Just enjoy it and get into it. And those sort of people are still around. I've found them in every project, you know, and where they're happy to rip in and do the hard yards, because the last few projects I've worked on, we've had a lot of pressure on the guys to meet targets. For example, not let the spoil sheds fill up, because otherwise that stops the whole tunnelling. And the one thing I make everyone understand when they come onto my cruise, we do not stop the underground works for anything. You know, we go hell for leather and we make it happen. Doesn't matter what we have to do, we make it happen that spoil shed gets emptied, even if we've got to get a wheelbarrow and take some out the backyard or something, you know. But those people are still around. I find them on every tunnel job. I've had some great guys, and they're still in tunnelling today in this day and age, and it's good to see. Some of the guys that have actually come through from working with me are actually now superintendents. I can't name names, but there's a couple of young guys that are superintendents, and I'm so proud of them. They just left me for dead. I gave them a start, and then away they went.
Well, that was going to be my next question. Towards being a super, and as a super or as a manager that you've been, what sort of advice could you give a new super? Like, I know that there's supervisors watching this YouTube channel and watching Let's Talk Tunnelling, and the guys that I'm getting supervisors and general supers on now. So you, like you said just then, the guys that you had working for you are now supers. What's the advice you gave them then? To make them into what they are now.
It probably sounds a load of crap to a lot of people, and I probably will say so. But when I first started, even as a labourer in tunnelling, and to the day I finished, even when I was out at Camellia there, I look on my little role in it, my little part of the project, as though it was my own business. I think of it as my business, and I think that hose doesn't need to be thrown out. Just shorten it a bit, put another fitting on it, and it's right to go. Coil the hoses up properly, coil the leads up properly. They won't get damaged, And if you think of it as your own little business, that you're running that business for a profit, then you can't go wrong, And as I got further into my career, I worked with some really sensational superintendents and managers, really good guys who, because I was always a bit of a bit volatile, a bit of a firebrand, I suppose you could say, but I had great managers that were so calm and quiet and steady. They'd just talk to me calmly and say, now what's the problem, and settle down, rah. And they knew how to get the best out of me. And conversely, you'd have someone else who'd get in your face. Well, that just blew up out of all proportion then. But some of those great managers that I had and superintendents, some great supers, once they trusted me and knew that they could rely on me, my aim was then to just let them concentrate on the pointy end of it, the excavation, all that sort of thing, keep that going. The skills that they had, let them do that, and they could forget all about the rest of it, forget all about the surface works, the spoil management, the supply of consumables, etc. The way I looked at it, that was my role. The superintendent, he'd discuss things with the manager, then the superintendent would discuss things with me, and he'd say, Fred, this is what I need to happen today and tomorrow. Bang, bang, bang. Done. Off you go. You make that happen. He can concentrate on his bigger tasks, and that's the way I got motivated surface crews, because notoriously guys on the surface feel a little bit left out. They think that, okay, we're the lower level of the tunnelling, we're not in the elite sort of thing. But once you get it into their mind that work on the surface is absolutely critical, that if you don't empty the spoil out of the shed, the road headers or the TBMs stop, tunnelling stops, it costs millions of dollars every day while that machine is down. So once you get it into their head and give them some pride in their work, that what they're doing is integral to the whole project, man, that's half the battle won. You've got them with pride in their work, and away they go,
Wow.
The main thing that I did, I'm not a plant operator. I can't operate jack shit. Well, I can operate them, but not worth two bob. My main skill is motivating people and getting the best out of crews. I've had some sensational guys working for me over the years, and they make me look good, because my area of the project excels, but it's because of them that it happens, And that's, as I say, surface workers, they feel left out a lot of times. They feel the poor relation to the tunneler. And I try and explain to them, if you're working on a TBM, it's like working in a jam factory. I said, you, except for the guy doing the driving, the rest of them are just bolting up pipes and bloody just the same shit every day, time after time after time. I said, you're doing all these different things. You're on loaders, you're on excavators, you're cleaning sumps, you're cleaning up sites, you know, you're doing 10 different things. And once they get that pride in their work, you're laughing, you know. Once they realise the importance of their work, then that's it. You're done and dusted.
Right. That's awesome, Fred. Oh, well, mate, I agree. Like, I've only really spent a lot of my time down the face, and I know exactly what you're talking about. We're a clicky bloody bunch of people down there, aren't we? We sort of think, you know, sometimes our own shit don't stink, but I tell you what, when I became a Sparky, I must admit I had a good hard look at myself too, and then, you know, dealing with a lot of the batch plants with breakdowns and maintenance, and then even the installation and site setup. Oh, mate, it's crucial. It's crucial. Like you say, there's all these processes and all these key elements to that TBM going, and that's all part of the major project, like you say. So that's
every
awesome,
person
Fred.
on the site, whether they be the cleaner in the crib room, because if the crib room goes to shit, then everything falls apart, you know. So every person on that site, from the cleaner to the TBM operator, are integrally important to it. You know, one goes down, the whole show goes down, you know. And, you know, it's, no, I've had some great jobs over the years.
Oh, mate, that's perfect. So from that Port Hedland job, where was your next gig, and from there on?
Yeah, conveyor tunnel at Port Hedland. Then I went to, oh, that's right. As it was coming to the end at Port Hedland, people were dropping like flies. They were leaving left, right and centre because it was pretty hot and miserable. And anyway, the management said to us, right, you guys that are here, if you stay right till the very end, clean the joint up, get it finished, completely done and dusted, we guarantee you a job on the Melbourne City Link, the road tunnel. Can't guarantee what the job will be, but we guarantee you a job on it. I said, yeah, sweet, that suits me. So, yeah, went back to Melbourne, onto Melbourne City Link, which was the first road tunnel down there in Victoria. And that runs down near Olympic Park and the tennis stadium, all that area, the MCG. It runs through underneath there. And, yeah, so that was...
that was a TBM job too? Next to the other
no,
TBM
they
job?
were roadheader. That was a roadheader job. That was my first roadheader job. And holy, when I stepped off the bottom of the alley Mac down in the, because I started at Swan Street Shaft in the middle of it, and because they were tunnelling in both directions from Swan Street Shaft and from either end to meet up. I stepped out of that alley Mac, early durly, I didn't know what I'd struck. There was machines roaring everywhere, loaders, dump trucks, you know, jumbos with drills set up ready to go, shotcrete rigs, everything was roaring at 100 mile an hour, and I'm going, whoa, what have I struck? But no, that turned out to be another great job. That was excellent. But because myself and the other guys that had stayed back at Port Hedland were coming in late, we just did whatever we were told, and that was fine. I had no problem with that. And a couple of the guys... So
almost like a bull gang? Were you like a surf group?
No, not really. You might be in a bull gang, you might be one day, but then you'd be on dump trucks, you know, taking out muck from the roadheaders and or the excavators. So just anything that needed doing. But it happened that the Swan Street Shaft was above the low point sump in that tunnel. And
so what's a low point sump? Please explain the low point sump to everyone.
It was the lowest point of the tunnel. The tunnel would sweep in from both ends, and that was the low point. That was where the main sump, even to this day, there's a big sump.
The deepest part from the surface, you mean, eh? So
correct.
We might come in from one way, and then we come under and we pop back up at another site. But that's the most deepest part of that tunnel. We call it the low point sump. And why is it called the sump? What's the sump?
That's where all the water drains to, the groundwater, or when there's a storm, the storm water that comes into the tunnel, and that tunnel was the wettest tunnel I've ever struck. The water was just pouring in. It was like a river. And
so that's groundwater, you mean, like natural groundwater, or were you under a river? Or?
Yeah, well, groundwater. We had gone under the Yarra River, but that wasn't what was causing the water. The Yarra River has a very hard rock base underneath it to stop. It can't erode down any further. The water was coming in through these alluvial floodplains around Swan Street, where over centuries of the Yarra River flooding, each year it would flood and deposit more and more alluvial soil there. And so it was very bad ground. It was extremely bad while they dug the shaft until they could get down into the good tunnelling rock again. And there was that much water coming into that tunnel. All the elm trees around Richmond, which are a couple of 100 years old, planted by the first European settlers, started to die. And because the groundwater was lowering that much, the water table, they couldn't get enough water to survive. So they had to employ water tankers to go around and water these elm trees all around Richmond there, and until we could get the tunnel fully lined, and that sealed it all up so that the water table rose again then. But while excavation...
because you dug the tunnel out, all the water that was keeping them hydrated was seeping into our tunnel, or into your tunnel.
Exactly.
So it was draining into there rather than giving it to these trees. So once you lined it and supported that tunnel and lined it with a waterproofing, that kept it out, and obviously these trees carried on a bit. So during that process, you had to go and bloody water them with tanks, water tanks. Horrible.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
Because those things are a couple of 100 years old, they're sort of national heritage around Richmond there in Melbourne. But that was my first experience.
So road headers. So I know for my first road header job, I didn't know what was going on, to be honest. I had no idea what a road header was. I had to ring my old man up and ask him, what the bloody hell's this big white thing doing? And it looks like it's on fire the way it's carrying on. And, so... And like you said, you're at a low point sump, which is the deepest part of that tunnel. They sunk a shaft, which is a tunnel that goes vertically straight down. How deep were we going? How deep was it?
About 70 metres there. And, so with that sump, because it was so wet, especially once the road headers broke through in each direction to Burnley and to Kingsway, then all the water started flooding to that one point. So at that point, we had four, you being a Sparky will know what I'm talking about, 90 kilowatt pumps. They're a huge pump, stand about 1.2 metres high with the intake at the top of the pump. We had four of those rigged up into two 8-inch lines going up the shaft to the water treatment plant just to keep the tunnel dewatered. And so that became part of my job. Every shift as I got out of the Alimac, I'd walk over, jump in, put the waders on, jump in, water up to my chin, and just start cleaning all around these pumps, all the broken earplugs, all the discarded earplugs and broken...
One of the boys said to me one day that the old man used to put buckets around everywhere at one of the sites. I think it was Cherrybrook. And he used to put buckets on there. And this is funny you say this, because I used to hear him whinge all the time. He used to come home and bloody whinge to me all the time. But he used to say about earplugs, the boys don't understand, or the people don't understand. They don't just disappear. When they throw them on the ground, they don't just disappear. They're not going to just evaporate.
No,
he said they end up somewhere. And here you are up to your bloody
They follow the course of the water to the nearest pump, and they help block the pumps up. And so... yeah, I just took that on after being told to do it a few times. I just automatically, every shift, went straight in with a paint scraper and a Hessian bag and start filling up all the broken coffee cups and earplugs and mashed up plywood and everything that had jammed around these pumps. So anyway, kept doing that every day, night and day shift. And people just assumed, it's not going to happen if Fred doesn't do it. So I kept doing it. People would razz you, hey, how's the water today? Fantastic. I never let them get to me. So eventually the concrete lining all came through, and the sump, which is there to this day and age, as you drive through, you won't ever see it because it's off to the left-hand side, got installed. And there was no more earplugs. There was no more crap coming down to block these pumps up. So there would be the odd little piece or one earplug or something might float into this permanent sump that had been built. And so I started sitting there with the pool scoop and a lounge chair and just hooked this out because the foreman didn't have anything else for me to do. No, you've been looking after the sump all the time. Get over there and look after the sump. So I did that. And in the end, there's 3 electricians and 3 of us pump labourers on shift. We're the only 6 people left in that tunnel and doing that. And I could have been doing that probably today still, but I just got bored to tears. I said to my Sparky that I was working with, I said, mate, I can't keep doing this anymore. I've got to go. And by this stage, I'd heard of a job up in Sydney at the Northside Storage Tunnel, a big sewer tunnel where all the spoil was going to go out by barge. And with my previous maritime experience, I thought, I've got to try and get onto that. Perfect. And so he says, oh, fair enough. But he says, you're mad. You're getting your money for nothing here doing jack shit.
And those bloody Sparkies will know that too, eh? They know how to get money for nothing.
Well, what it was, we were the only 6 still there on the 7374 roster. That's why there was 6 of us to cover the 374 roster, because those pumps had to be maintained 24 hours a day. Everyone else...
24 hours a day, 365 days of the bloody week too, Fred. I tell you what, I had 3 choices. I had 3 choices for trades. I was bloody lucky. Boilie, fitter, or a Sparky. And one of my good mates was a Sparky, or a couple of them were. And I used to think, righto, 3 trades. Look at a fitter, my fitter mate, and I go, oh, bugger that. Boilies, nah. Then I looked at the Sparky, clean as a whistle.
Yeah.
First up on the surface, first in the shower, and had to flash his car. And I thought, Sparky.
That's it. Yeah, definitely. Well, as I say, there was 6 of us left on that project on the 7374 roster, 12-hour shifts, money for nothing, but those pumps had to keep running 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, and everyone else on the project had gone down to just an 8-hour day shift, that were left there. Well, people thought I was absolutely nuts when I flew up to Sydney to apply for this job on the Northside Storage Tunnel, and I ended up getting that too. So
but this is funny. This is classic. Those guys, like you say, that shoot down the face and don't realise, those little jobs. And I've said it so many times. The old man used to say it all the time as well. Those little jobs. So they used to walk past that sump. No one would go in there like you and clean out those earbuds because they thought, that's not tunnelling. No. Here you were, chipping away, toiling away every day, getting your waders on, getting up to your bloody chin in water and getting all these little earplugs. Ended up, cruisy number, money for jam, and staying there for as long as you wanted. But then all of a sudden, another job come up and bang, you're away.
Yeah, and your old man actually was a prime example. He's so experienced, been doing it for donkey's years, yet he was humble enough. He would do the smallest things. He'd get in and do a bit of painting. Whatever he did, he would do to the best of his ability. Whatever you needed him to do. No, Fred, I'll look after that. No worries. You go and do whatever you got to do. I'll look after that. And as you said, buckets for earplugs, just little things like that. He was a stickler for details like that. And as I've said to many people, you don't get many more people as experienced as him, but he was humble enough to do the smallest things like cleaning sumps out, putting covers over sumps, whatever I needed him to do, bang, he was doing it. And no worries.
And you were probably the same. Like you said earlier about, treat this like it's your business. And I know when Dad first come over to Australia, he was airleg in Telfer, and they were on contract, and it was a hard job, like, rise mining, stoping and all this sort of stuff. But he was on contract, so the more dirt he had on the ground, the more money he had in his pocket. Yep. So cleaning his gear, making sure that they were maintained, looking after his gear. and having all the spare parts to be able to keep drilling and keep putting dirt on the ground was putting money in your pocket, putting food on the table. So
Exactly
I suppose, like you say about, treat it like it's your business. Well, that was the old man. And he never forgot that, even when he went on to wages. And you get some people in the industry, they rock up, take the money and go home and don't realise the bigger picture of, there's people in the industry that do come in and they treat it like their business as well. And there's that respect for it as well, because it'll look after you. It'll look after you, won't it?
Yeah. Well, the other day I was watching you talking to Brian Marshall. You won't mind me saying his name because I talked to myself the other day. But he and I saw where he said to a couple of his trainees, "You've been given the winning lotto tickets by getting this job in tunnelling." And fair dinkum, there was no truer word said. When Ernie told me that I had that job, that very first job back in there, I felt like I'd been given a winning lotto ticket because, here was money. I was going to get money every week. I didn't need to worry about the weather, whether I could get out fishing or not. I was going to get a solid wage every week, and it was just like winning lotto. And I never forgot that, and I never took it for granted ever. People might say, "Oh, bullshit, he was so fiery and blueing with various people," and I did at times. But all my superintendents and managers, basically, most of them would have me back in a flash. If ever they heard that I was out of a job, bang, I got phone calls, come back, come here, I've got a job for you. Because wherever they wanted something done, bearing in mind that I can't operate anything, I just motivate people and manage things. I organise things and make things happen. And that's what the superintendent wants. He's got plenty of loader drivers and plenty of excavator operators and plenty of dump truck operators, but he wants someone to organise when those things happen and where they happen, So, and that's where my main skills have been. But yeah, that going up to Northside Storage Tunnel, that was that was a great job. That was right on the edge of Sydney Harbour at Tunks Park, because we'd been hearing that that there was, whenever there was a storm, there was raw sewage flowing out into Sydney Harbour, and we thought, oh, bullshit, that can't be happening. That's nonsense, But there was this job had to be completed before the Sydney Olympics so that it wouldn't make the organisers look stupid by having to cancel the ocean swimming or the yachting or whatever, the racing, because there was sewage in the harbour. So anyway, I had a RDO came up, and on my, that's right, my 7374 roster, on my 4-day break, I flew up to Sydney and went into the office where they were. And same story. Have you got an appointment? I said, no, I just wanted to find out who the superintendent is and who the manager is, and have a chat to them about this job that's coming up down at Tunks Park. And the office girl says, oh, I don't know about that. And I said, well, the superintendent must be here because there's nothing down on site. I've been down there. And sure enough, he came out and introduced himself, and we had a good chat, and a couple of engineers came over and we had a good chat. And what are you doing up here? Why are you here? I said, I want to put my hat in the ring for a job down at Tunks Park there. Told him about my boating experience, etc., and years at sea. And I said, I heard you having the spoil taken away by barges. And yeah, so we had a real good chat for a while.